Symbiotic relationships are one of the most interesting parts of this hobby for me. Ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated with seeing animals packed together on a reef. Although I now know that the reef is a battlefield for real estate, there are still these pockets of cooperation between completely different animals that's amazing. This video is about 5 such relationships. Now the title of the video is Oddball Relationships because I'm sure everyone is very familiar with this one: clownfish and anemones. This combination is likely responsible for drawing more people into the hobby than anything else really. I figure that we could take a look at some of the less common partnerships going forward. Before we get to the rest of the list, I'm sure I'm going to get questions about this particular shot, so I may as well explain it now. The anemone is a long tentacle from Vietnam. It just happened to detach and get blown gently by the return to spin in place to form kind of like an anemone carousel for these 2 clownfish that you see here. It spun like this for about an hour or 2, and honestly I couldn't replicate something like this if I tried. A definite oddball are hermit crabs of the genus Pagarita. These little guys live in colonies of Astreopora. However, I've seen them in other corals when they're collected from different regions. For example, these yellow crabs are from Australia, but I've seen blue ones from Fiji that were living in a different coral called Platygyra. When they first came onto the scene, there really wasn't a care guide to go off of, so we had to try our best to keep them alive. We found that they filter feed mainly, and they seem to really like small meaty foods such as rotifers. They seem to do better with heavy feeding, but it's important to not overfeed and pollute the tank, because the food that they consume, it's not likely to be consumed by fish or other inhabitants. These hermit crabs usually never leave their burrows, but one day I did see one leave its den and hitch a ride onto the snail shell. Their body kind of looks like a wasp, I guess. Now I don't know what this is all about, but I have a feeling that they don't survive long outside of the coral, so I made every effort to get it back into its original hole. Hopefully the little guy made it back. Next up are sexy shrimp and mini carpet anemones. There's many types of shrimp that develop symbiotic relationships with both corals and anemones. But the sexy shrimp are my personal favorites because they do this little dance with their tail, and they're not nearly as reclusive as some of the other inverts. That's actually one of the things that kept some really cool symbiotic relationships off of this list. The critters hide so much that I can never even get a shot of them. The other nice thing about this pair is that they're very easy to care for. The anemones themselves are very tough, and they don't move around as much as some other types of anemones, such as bubble tips, which are likely to run laps around your tank. The shrimps are active, and they can take care of themselves, so you don't have to go out of your way to feed them. I should mention that sexy shrimp will host in any number of things, not just carpet anemones. I personally haven't had them bother any corals, but when it comes to shrimp, it's always a possibility that they might nip at some polyps, so kind of keep an eye out for that. Next is the BISMA worm rock. These feather duster worms are colorful and have excellent vision probably because any motion that they detect sends them hiding in their coral host. The worms grow inside colonies of corals such as Porites and occasionally an oddball coral in its own right, Sophastria. As you can probably guess, they're filter feeders. I often get asked if they reproduce and increase in number over time. Unfortunately, I don't really have a good answer for that. One thing that I can say is that the tubes that they grow in actually lengthen over time, but I can't really get a good idea if the individual count goes up. In any case, these worms bring a lot of interest and motion to what would otherwise be a motionless coral. Sticking with the worm theme for just a moment, this one is a really subtle oddball. This coral is a walking dendro, and I have to put dendro in quotes because it's not actually a dendrophylla at all. It's a photosynthetic coral called a heterosamia. The thing that makes it interesting is that it serves as a host to a peanut worm that lives at its base. You can see the small hole right at the bottom, and unfortunately, peanut worms are super reclusive, so it's not likely to come out. Despite the worm's shyness, the interaction with the coral is pretty cool because it drags the coral around the substrate with it. Each day, you can expect this coral to be in a different location on the substrate as the peanut worm scoots around. Although the coral is photosynthetic and gets most of its nutrition from light, the walking dendro is a capable predator and can gobble up food if offered either meaty frozen foods or, in this case, coral pellet food. We started with a fish, so I'll end the video with a fish. The last symbiotic relationship on my list is the partnership between the YASHA goby and a pistol shrimp. I love that the fish acts as a lookout for the shrimp that's nearly blind, by the way, and the shrimp, it tends to a burrow that it makes for the two of them. The shrimp almost always has one antenna attached onto the goby as a means of communication. I also like how they have matching red and white stripes. Anything that's striking red and white, it's not particularly common in this hobby. Off the top of my head, I can only think of two other things: a peppermint bodianus hogfish and a peppermint angel, which is almost never seen in the hobby because they're super deep water, and I think that they're like $30,000 if you wanted one. At first, these two were super reclusive, but over time, the fish came out more and more, and now spends most of its time out in the open. The shrimp isn't out very much, but if you're patient, it makes an appearance once in a while. Okay, that pretty much does it for my top 5 favorite symbiotic relationships. In the comments below, let me know what are your favorites. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye guys.